Good afternoon, everyone. I just observed some of the critical preparation that is done by the NYPD on a regular basis to continue our ongoing efforts to keep all New Yorkers safe, to prevent any acts of terrorism, and to be ready, God forbid that there was an attack here in the city, to be ready to contain it and limit it. I want to say at the outset, this is a time when we're all very reflective given the events we've seen around the world. I want to take a moment to honor the memory of two New Yorkers we lost abroad last week, brother and sister Alexander and Sasha Pinzowski, fell victim to the terror attacks at the Brussels airport. Our hearts go out, our prayers are with their family and their loved ones and their friends. At the same time, we mourn for those lost in attacks in the last few days, very heinous attacks in Pakistan and in Iraq, which makes the point that these terror attacks are afflicting both Muslim nations and non-Muslim nations alike. The scourge of terrorism is being felt all over the world. And again, this is a moment where the community of nations need to stand together, and all nations, all cities need to work together to fight terror and to work in a spirit of cooperation to end the day when terrorism is such a part of our lives. And I always emphasize the best way for each and every one of us to respond to these barbaric acts is by going about our lives, continuing to live in the manner of a democratic society and showing that the terrorists will not intimidate us. In New York City, we know we are protected every day, 24/7, by the finest police force in the country. And we know that the cooperation between the NYPD and our federal and state partners is at the highest point it's ever been. Our close working relationship with the FBI and Homeland Security in particular help to keep us safe every day, and we work closely with our state partners as well. The tabletop exercise that I just witnessed is part of a multifaceted approach where we make sure that all of our different elements of the NYPD are ready and coordinated in the event of any kind of incident. And it is important to remember, all New Yorkers should note with great appreciation that over now 15 years, the NYPD has repeatedly prevented attacks and repeatedly foiled plots directed at this city or initiated in this city. And that means also that the NYPD has managed year after year to protect some of the biggest and most complex gatherings each year in this entire country, the UN General Assembly, the recent papal visit, to name just a few. Today's exercise allowed us to continue testing our strategic and operational response in the event of a terror attack, including an attack that might take several forms simultaneously. And we understand that that is the dynamic we now are living with, the danger of an attack that might hit on many fronts simultaneously, but we have built our capacity to handle that exact eventuality. During an emergency, we'll be dealing with rapidly changing dynamics. That's why these drills are so important, to make sure that the lines of communication are strong and coordination is great. Today's exercise affirms that we are ready. Here in this city, we are ready. The NYPD is ready to handle any and all situations. And this is just one of the things we do to protect people. Crucial was the creation of our 500-plus officer critical response command, the largest dedicated anti-terror force of any police force in the country. And with the additional technology we've provided to all our officers, all 36,000 officers can be a part of both preventing terror and responding to it, God forbid it happens. Further, we have 2,000 additional officers coming online by the end of this year who will aid in all of our efforts. So these are sober and serious exercises, but they're a reminder of just how prepared the NYPD is. Let me say a few words in Spanish before turning to Chief O'Neill. Acabo de ver unas maniobras que demuestran el gran nivel de preparación y poder de nuestras fuerzas de seguridad. Nuestros equipos enfrentan situaciones complejas durante las emergencias, ya sean de terrorismo, salud pública o de cualquier otro tipo. Sin embargo, nos protegen los mejores hombres y mujeres en la nación y confiamos plenamente en su trabajo. With that, I'd like to turn to Chief Jimmy O'Neill, who led the exercise earlier. He'll go over a summary of what took place. We'll take questions on this exercise and on terrorism-related topics. Then we'll take other police-related questions, and then I'll stay back for other off-topic questions. Chief O'Neill.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So we just, well, it's not finished yet. They're still upstairs working on it. We did a tabletop exercise, and it's multiple location attacks, similar to what happened in Paris and similar to what happened to Brussels. This is not our first one. We do tabletops all the time. This one was NYPD specific. We also do what's called red letter exercises. That's more of an operational at the lower levels. We'll go to a precinct, we'll hand a precinct sergeant a letter, and in that letter we'll give a scenario, and then we'll run through the drill in real time to make sure everybody knows what's going on, what their responsibility is, and how we're going to make things better for the people of this great city. So the objective of the tabletop is to sharpen our allocation and deployment skills in the event of an attack, and our goal was to raise the level of dialogue in the executive decision-making process as we go through the exercise. So this was for the department executives. If there is ever, God forbid, any sort of attack in New York City, there's a plan that we have, and we have to make sure that as people in these positions change, they know what their duties and responsibilities are, and they're very specific. So the tabletop that we did today replicates what happened in Paris. There's active shooters, there's a hostage situation, suicide bombers, and multiple explosions. And it's important that not only patrol knows what their function is, but also what ESU, our emergency service unit, does, the strategic response group, the critical response command, other counterterrorism assets, the bomb squad, hostage negotiation, and TARU know specifically what their responsibilities are. And that's why we walk through this exercise so carefully. And if it's at multiple locations in multiple boroughs, there's going to be different people in charge. Obviously, as the chief of operations, I'll be in overall command. But as the jobs are spread out through the city, we need our borough chiefs to take command of their locations also. And they have to work closely with counterterrorism. They have to work closely with the Detective Bureau to make sure that we get through this as safely as possible. The locations we chose today were all chosen for their iconic value. And as we went through the exercise, it's kind of stressful. It's stressful for the executives. They weren't given a lot of advance notice. There's a protocol that has to be responded, and we put together some simulated radio transmissions. We played those transmissions. The communications division did a great job with it, and we turned to the borough commanders and said, "You're sitting in your office. What are you going to do? What's your first step? How are you going to make this better?" And they had to outline exactly step by step what they were going to do, and they all did a great job. We are constantly drilling. We have extensive plans to respond to any and all situations. But again, as we saw in Paris, anything can happen. And it's not necessarily going to happen at 12 o'clock noon on a Monday. It might happen at 8 o'clock at night. It might happen at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we have to make sure we have the contingency set up for that. We made sure everyone knows their roles exactly. And again, today was police specific. But as we go further out in time, we're going to make sure that, and we've had other tabletops with other agencies that will incorporate all the other agencies in here, because a lot of decisions have to be made as we go through this, and they're not all NYPD decisions. Thanks.
Okay, we will take questions again first on this tabletop exercise and terrorism-related questions. Go ahead, Dave.
Mayor, and also Commissioner Brown, I don't know if you heard yesterday, but Donald Trump was commenting on the situation in Brussels and said that he had predicted something like this would happen in Brussels, and he said indeed it did happen. And then he said, if you think that's bad, it's going to be worse here in America, and specifically New York. Is he right?
No, I will just start. I found his comments negative and defeatist, and I think we should recognize the extraordinary work that is done by all of our men and women in uniform all over this country to protect us. And it's no accident that we have been so well protected, both here in New York City and all over the country, since 9/11. That is based on design and hard work and greater cooperation between our intelligence services and local law enforcement. So I'm quite sick of Donald Trump denigrating the ability of this country to protect people.
As the events in Brussels continue to unfold, I think it's become quite apparent, as admitted to by their senior officials, that this was their 9/11 moment. We had ours on 9/11. Subsequent investigations into that event clearly showed that where the United States was pre-9/11 was not where it needed to be going into the 21st century, that the lack of communication, sometimes required by law, where the CIA could not communicate with the FBI, for example, that all changed. And a lot of what the NYPD has become since 9/11 is reflective of that change. My predecessor, Mayor's predecessor, Mayor Bloomberg, Commissioner Kelly, created certainly one of the most robust counterterrorism capabilities in the world. We have expanded dramatically on that, a different platform since 2014 as ISIS has become more prominent over Al-Qaeda because of the concern about the social media inspired or directed or enabled type of attack. So that what is going on right now in Brussels, I think we're learning that, one, within their own police and intelligence services, they weren't working closely together. Europe, despite no longer having physical borders between countries, their various intelligence agencies are still operating oftentimes as independent entities. So events in Europe are showing a system that is still basically shaped and formed by lack of coordination and cooperation between the nations. In the United States now, we have a significant number of fusion centers, which are all coordinated with each other. We have here the Joint Terrorism Task Force that works very closely with our 1,000-person counterterrorism intelligence group. So if you think of what we have in New York City, and some of the presidential candidates may not be even aware of this, that we have, for example, 12, soon to be 13 detectives assigned overseas, the creation of Commissioner Kelly. That has proven to be a phenomenal benefit to us in terms of relationships, getting information very quickly when an event does occur. Additionally, we have the 1,000-person existing counterterrorism intelligence entity. We have, on top of that, we have the Joint Terrorism Task Force that works very closely under FBI direction. We have reinforced over these last 2 years relationships with everybody, Port Authority, state police, federal agencies. So we are seamless in both the respect we have for each other as well as our operational capabilities. And then in response to the ISIS issue, ISIL if you want to call them that what we keep reiterating, which you now see everywhere in the city, rather than pulling in precinct officers each day from all over the city, we now have, between SRG, CRC, and emergency services, almost 2,000 officers who are extraordinarily well-trained and very well-equipped to deal with it. So we are as prepared as anybody can be to try to protect against, through intelligence and information gathering, and in the likelihood that there will be an attack, and there will be at some point in time in our lives. That's the reality. We're hoping it won't be here. We're working very hard to keep it from happening here. But despite that hope, despite that premise, we need to be prepared. And so today's exercise was, what if we had 4 simultaneous events with all of the things that we have ISIS has shown the capability of doing in the country's largest city? Would we be able to handle it? How would we be able to handle it? And so that's why we're basically doing this exercise today.
Commissioner Brown, you said that Belgian authorities need to communicate more, and European authorities in general need to communicate within their divisions more. Is the NYPD advising the Belgians, European officials, where they can improve, and specifically what?
No, that in terms of, in fact, the trip that Commissioner Miller was planning to take on April 4th to Paris, we put that back a little bit to give things time to kind of come together in Belgium, because their cases are still very active and unfolding each day. So we don't want to be over there kind of stepping on their investigation. So we're not there advising, we're seeking to learn so that we can take that back here. If asked for advice, if asked for that type of collaboration, we're more than willing to give it. But right now, they're the ones on the field. They're the ones basically seeing firsthand the effects of the current capabilities of ICES and the directed attack by ICES. So we're seeking to learn from them.
Mr. Mayor, this is for you, the Commissioner, and for John Miller. There's a new video today from CNN that shows Paris attackers partying, smoking cigarettes, dancing in a club. That was 8 months before the Paris attacks, showing how quickly somebody can be radicalized, how quickly the trip from hard partying guy to terrorist killer. I wonder if you have done any thinking or thought about how quickly one can turn from being a regular person to radicalized, and if that informs your policies here and the people you have on your watch list.
I'll just start by saying I think that's why the flow of information is so important, and keeping a deep connection to every community of this city. That's why we've made a number of decisions over the last few years to strengthen the dialogue with different communities, with community leaders, with clergy, with others who would be in a good position to let us know if there was a problem. And I think that's something we have to continue to deepen.
Martha, that's a great question in light of the current defamation of the Muslim community in the United States, that in the current political process, that how quickly somebody can become radicalized. We have known that for quite some time. John Miller and his people are quite expert on it. And one of the reasons we are seeking to improve relationships wherever we can with the Muslim community, particularly the very large population we have in this city, is if you're a Muslim family here and your child begins to become radicalized, and it can happen so quickly, either through the young person sitting in front of a computer and then becoming enabled by getting into contact with one of the ISIS people sitting in Syria, pumping out through social media, or, as we've seen clearly in the events in Brussels, a directed attack. It can happen that quickly. And what does a family do if they see the young person starting to become radicalized? Who do they go to? Chances are they're not going to go to us if they don't trust us. They're not going to go to the government because they worry about how would the government treat them. And if the government is giving off impressions that we think the whole population is a potential enemy, what does that say to them? I was at dinner last night with my wife, and a favorite restaurant, favorite waiter. He's Moroccan, U.S. citizen, family's here. His wife actually works sometimes in the restaurant checking coats. And he was talking about his 8-year-old daughter, watching what's gone on this past couple of weeks. And, you know, the daughter's comment to the father was something, he was relating this last night. Daddy, why did they hate us so much? You know, so what do you say to that when the rhetoric is all about hate of a whole group of people, in that case 800,000 people in this city that are Muslim? That are they going to work with us? Are they going to become what has happened in Europe, where they become very isolated? That neighborhood in Brussels might as well be in another country. It's so isolated from the rest of what goes on. Fortunately, we don't have a great deal of that in New York. They assimilate very quickly. The recent population growth in this city was reported the other day, 500,000 new people in the city, 400,000 have left as the city churns. 400,000 of those 500,000 are immigrants from other countries. That's New York City. And that's the issue we have to deal with. That how do we stop them from becoming radicalized? Well, if we can't work with the community, if they don't trust us to work with them, then we're not going to be able to stop them.
So does that inform how you do your surveillance and how you look at people who might be on your watch list, worrying like at what time they could turn from being a regular citizen of the city to some radicalized terrorist?
I could just make a comment and turn it back over to John Miller, the mayor, but it really goes to this whole, the dog that won't die, this demographic unit debate, if you will. That was not an investigatory entity when it was created, and it was down to 2 people when Commissioner Kelly left, and within a couple of weeks we did away with it because the function was no longer needed. And the idea here is to improve relationships as much as we can going forward. And it's been referenced by some of the presidential candidates, referenced by even some of the media in this town, that somehow or another, when that demographics unit went away, the fact that 2 detectives out of 1,000 are no longer performing those duties, that we are no longer investigating terrorism, that we were no longer doing what we do so well, detecting terrorism and stopping it. And we are committed to that, but we need to work with information from the community. That's how we've always done it, whether it was breaking down the mafia, it was getting informants in the mafia, it was getting people who were tired of the mafia and what they were doing in their neighborhoods, helping us out. So that's where the thrust we've been working on is to build relationships rather than tear them down. John and Mr. Mayor, on this, Mayor, you certainly talk a lot about this.
So you can't separate these two things. One piece is community relations, which is an uphill struggle because, as the commissioner has already framed, the NYPD historically has had issues in developing relationships within the Muslim community because of historic issues. So one of the things moving forward within the new administration was to reach out, to bring in old friends, to bring in new friends, and to bring in critics. We did that in 3 separate groups, and then we did it in one big group where we had everybody together and put everything on the table. The beginning of your question, which is how does it affect our surveillance and other things, would be helped with a little framing. As the commissioner stated, there's this misimpression that there is some kind of blanket surveillance going on. The way it actually works, by the rules set by the Henshaw Agreement, is individuals are identified based on reasonable suspicion, reason to investigate, a proper police investigative purpose. That is then written up into an investigative statement, which is reviewed by a committee that includes NYPD attorneys, former federal prosecutors, investigators, intelligence analysts, who weigh everything in that investigative statement. If it passes muster, then it becomes an authorized investigation. And then, and only then, are tools like surveillance teams, human informants, outside sources, in some rare cases, undercover officers applied. So there is an awful lot of rigor to this process. And what we are trying to do is to walk and chew gum at the same time, which is make sure we maintain what is, I think, a singular capability in terms of investigation and terrorism prevention, while we build out what we already have a basis for, but we want to build on to improve a better relationship with the community. During the holiday, we had a couple of significant threats, and I was struck by the idea that a couple of those came over from the FBI through the intelligence community, and they were the subject of an awful lot of focus and time that we spent in secure, compartmented facilities. A couple others came in from members of the Muslim community, where they told us things they saw, people they knew, things that were said, and turned into significant investigations. I think that that was the beginning of a turning point where we were beginning to see new signs of trust from the community. And I think, frankly, some of the comments that the commissioner made at the end of last week helps to reinforce that relationship.
John, if I could just follow up, is there a worry, do you have a worry that because people return so quickly that you can miss it?
It's always something we think about. As you have duly noted, the time from flash to bang, from radicalization to action, is something that in the ISIS era we've seen shorten. It is something that then underscores the need for greater community involvement there, which requires greater community trust, which is something that we're working on both ends.
Let me add 2 quick points, and then we'll take other questions. We've talked about the 900 officers, the 900 Muslim officers in the NYPD who protect us all. They are also role models for their community, particularly for young people in the community. They are people that parents and grandparents can go to in the community where they live if they have concerns. I made a conscious decision to salute and hold up a couple of examples of these good officers in my State of the City, in the video we did before, and in the family that came forward to do the Pledge of Allegiance, to remind the people of this city that 900 officers who protect us every day are also part of the larger solution, because they're showing the community that the American dream is alive and well for them. Conversely, what we've heard from Donald Trump, what we've heard from Ted Cruz, suggests to so many Muslim Americans that they're not going to be allowed to belong in this country. And think about that for a minute. People come here from all over the world, every background, every faith, with the goal of being here and being part of this culture and achieving the opportunities that are available only here. And then to see people running for president suggesting that they should be segregated somehow and withheld from those opportunities, cut off from those opportunities while everyone else gets to enjoy them. Well, to the commissioner's point about the difference between here and much of Western Europe, that would be the pathway to creating the tensions and divisions that exist in many of the Western European nations, where Muslim residents and Muslim citizens don't feel they actually could ever belong. And the magic of America has been that people can belong, and it's been reiterated in so many powerful ways, and now we have this horrible national discussion tearing against it and confirming ISIS's propaganda. This is the most troubling point. ISIS is trying to tell the Muslim world that America won't accept Muslim people. And here are two men running for president of the United States, literally playing into ISIS's hands as if they're working from an ISIS script, setting up an atmosphere of segregation and negativity. So that's what we have to combat. But the good news in New York City is we've always believed in a welcome for all people, and I think the communities here know that and feel that, and we're going to do even more to make that clear. Yeah.
Does the job of the average people have changed as the threat changes? So with the active shooter emerging as a larger threat, they're not the specialized guys, the average guys.
I think it changes a lot, because they're going to be our first responders. If something happens at Lincoln Center, it's going to be 2-0 Charlie or 2-0 Adam. They'll be the first ones there. And we teach our people that they're not to wait outside. As soon as there's another couple of cops there, they're to go in and go to the threat. So it changes their way they think about their job significantly.
John, can you elaborate a little bit more about the threats that you said you received? Was it over the holiday season or over this last Easter holiday?
No. I can't elaborate.
Damn good answer.
Can I ask one question to you, Mayor? Can you say a little bit more about the tabletop? What landmarks you're looking at? What exactly?
I'll let Jimmy speak to specifics, but I'll say what was so striking, and I've seen this before in the tabletop exercise, they're very dynamic. They don't sugarcoat it. It's fast and it's tough, and a lot of difficult things are happening. A lot of difficult choices have to be made, and that is the high standard NYPD holds itself to.
Okay. So what we did was we picked 4 locations, all of them iconic. I want to go into where they are. And we picked them for that reason, that if there's high volume, high traffic, tough to get to, tough to perceive. There's so many people there, it's tough to perceive exactly what's going on, and that's why we picked these locations. And I think it's important for all our borough commanders and all our bureau chiefs to think about this. I think about it constantly, and we have to, this is a perishable skill. If you don't think about this, if you don't figure out what decisions you have to make, if it does happen, then you're going to be behind the 8 ball, and we don't want that at all.
Okay.
Is there, in publicizing these tabletop exercises, is there a message you're also trying to send the terrorists?
Oh, certainly. That the idea is that I think we all understand that there's going to be a continuing effort to inspire, to enable, or in some instances, the worst-case scenario, direct. In other words, what's going on in Europe right now, where people trained overseas, Syria, elsewhere, are sent here, very similar to 9/11. So the idea is, to the best of our ability, to prevent it from happening here, certainly be capable to respond very quickly, active shooter, bomb disabling, etc., but also that it discourages them from coming here for just that reason. Because we do have, fortunately, because we are so well supported both politically and financially, both the local government and federal government, and hopefully the federal government will continue that financial support, as well as the extraordinary collaboration we have with our colleagues in the alphabet agencies, the FBI and others, that the idea is that this is a target that is not going to be easy to attack, because they would love to do it here. That's the reality of it. It's news capital of the world, that there's 15 or 16 of your cameras right here for this typical news conference that we have in New York City. You don't get this anyplace else in America for a typical news conference, and they understand that, so that's why they'd like to do it here. But for 15 years now that we've been able to stop them, those that we know of, the threats that we're aware of, and who knows what other ones may have occurred that we're not aware of. And that's the one that always worries us, the ones that we don't know of. That's always the biggest fear.
Thank you, Mayor. So following what happened at the Capitol today, there were rumors on social media about a partial evacuation of Times Square. Was this part of the exercise, or was it a rumor?
No, I was in coincidence up at Times Square today at lunch that, as you know, we're going to be remodeling, rebuilding our Times Square substation, so we're up there today. No, there was no partial evacuation of Times Square, and it was not part of the exercise. One of the things we look at in these exercises, and Jimmy and his people put together a phenomenal set of scenarios today, is, and the mayor commented on this, about public awareness. What if we wanted to shut down the subway lines? They could be shut down by order, or they could be self-activated. The public might want to stay out of the subways because of concern of additional bombs in the subway, if that's where some of them have gone off. Similarly, schools. We have 1 million kids in schools if something were to happen daytime. How do you get parents in contact with their kids, particularly if the public transportation system shuts down? The egress of vehicles out of the city, particularly if the attacks in Manhattan or Brooklyn or the Bronx. There's so many different things that the time to have answers is not when it's happening, but well before, so you already have answers to whatever might happen. John?
I think just to follow up on your specific question, while we were doing this exercise, which was to test command and control, incident command, there was a notional attack on a major concert venue, on the financial sector, on another large public gathering place. The Blackberries were buzzing with shots fired at the Capitol, reports of a fence jumper at the White House, and a explosive detection canine dog in Times Square that had alerted on a package inside a trash can that required a bomb squad response and the blocking of a perimeter to resolve that. So, as they say, life imitates art, life imitates exercise, and the whole process of dealing with multiple crises on paper in the tabletop while multiple crises were unfolding outside was part of the learning experience.
Just to follow up, I know that you said that you were looking at iconic locations, but are we seeing from Europe that they're not always picking iconic locations? They want to show that they can go anywhere. So how does that apply to any local neighborhood?
That's an excellent question. So part of the exercise is that as these events were unfolding, we had to make sure we had sufficient personnel in place at all the other locations throughout the city to make sure there wasn't a massive self-deployment to the 1 or 2 or 3 locations. It's part of the exercise.
Mayor or Commissioner, from today's tabletop, could you give us any sense of some of the things that the city is doing or looked at doing today in the tabletop that could be endangered by budget cuts that have been proposed at the federal level to the USC funds?
In the tabletop today, because we had multiple attacks going on at multiple different kinds of venues requiring multiple responses, one heavily involved the response from the bomb squad because of multiple suspicious packages. 2 others involved active shooters, suicide bombers. All of this was happening at once. On the average, New York City gets in the vicinity of $180 million of urban area security funds every year. The proposed executive budget that's been sent to Congress now would cut that in half to $90 million. One of our systems, which operates in real time and builds every year, the domain awareness system, which is the core of the the technical background of our counterterrorism efforts in and of itself costs $50 million a year as it continues to grow and maintains and sends data in real time. So that would crunch down money that is spent on critical overtime for counterterrorism assets. That would disable our ability to continue to buy and maintain the specialized equipment that would have come into play today during that exercise. Those cuts, if they were carried out as proposed, would simply be devastating. And to contemplate that as a government at a time when the world events are telling you this problem is increasing in speed, cadence, and seriousness would be irresponsible.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Police Commissioner, this time of political rhetoric, your message to the Muslim community has been one of inclusion. What kind of feedback are you getting from the community in light of what you've been saying?
I think the community appreciates the fact that leadership here in New York City is standing up for them and saying that they belong, that they're Americans too, and they are respected in this city, embraced in this city, part of what makes New York City great. So that should be the message everywhere in the country. You think about the logic. If you don't want to see young people radicalized, to Marcia's question, if you don't want to see young people radicalized, treat them with respect, treat them like they are part of this society. Don't push them out of this society. So the answer to your question is, I think there has been an appreciation for the fact that we are not allowing some of this horrible national rhetoric to dictate the reality here. We're going to stand up for the values of New York City, which are values of respect and inclusion for every kind of person.
We'll move on to some other police topics just for the moment, all right? Chris, other police topics?
Earlier question, you said there were threats over the holidays, and were asked Easter weekend. You said no. Is that no, you're not commenting, or no?
No, we're not commenting.
No, he's not commenting.
What's going on in Times Square? Times Square, he just...
Times Square was an alert by a canine detection dog that is fielded by one of the private security entities there. The dog alerted multiple times on one place. Bomb squad responded. They used their render safe procedures with the proper distances and determined that there was no threat. It was inside a trash can. They looked inside, and whatever the dog was alerting on, it wasn't an explosive.
Questions to the Commissioner?
Okay, yeah.
For the Commissioner, another topic, last week in the 46th precinct, a police officer shot a pit bull. At least on video, it appeared that the officer was not being seriously threatened. That's what it appeared. Can you tell us about that investigation and also the issue of pepper spray? I know that some of the officers were getting more enhanced pepper spray. When they might use them in a situation like that?
Right, the incident referred to was officers responding to a domestic violence call, and an adjacent apartment, the woman in the apartment opened the door, and a dog came out, about a 50-pound pit bull, that the two officers, one of them reacted by pulling his firearm. The dog kept coming toward him, and he ended up shooting the dog one time. So the questions come up, couldn't they have used pepper spray? Did he need to shoot at all? That'll be part of the shooting review investigation. I've seen the video myself, or portions of it. So we always, in any shooting incident, and last year we had, I think, 65 incidents, including 18 involving dogs. One of the reasons that we have increased the potency of our pepper spray significantly was the old spray would not, in fact, disable a dog. It wasn't potent enough. The new spray would. But in all circumstances, we have to leave it to the officer's understanding of what's happening at the scene and as to what piece of equipment he might use. Taser, pepper spray, firearm. In this instance, he used the firearm, so now as part of the investigation, he'll have to justify what was going through his mind at that particular time.
Over the weekend, a transgender woman was raped inside a bathroom at the Stonewall Inn. I was wondering if there's any update on that, and if, Mayor, if you can respond to that, since you headline Gender Equity NYC.
What's the allegation? Sure.
Good afternoon. The Special Victims Division responded to that and was able to grab some video. It's probative. We haven't identified. We have a very good image of that person, and we're moving forward with the case now. That's all I want to say at this time. But the case is going well. People inside the Stonewall know him. and we'll go from there, hopefully to get them identified in the next coming days.
It's a very disturbing incident taking place in a site that's very important historically, and where something good happened in terms of, creating more opportunity for people to live their lives. To see a violent incident like this is very, very troubling. But I have confidence, based on the information that Chief Boyce just indicated, that we will apprehend this individual.
Two questions. One about comments that Assemblyman Charles Barron made, I think last week. Commissioner, you said that you might look at those as possibly inciting violence or riots. I just wanted to know if there was any formal inquiry into the Assemblyman based on those remarks. And then secondly, there was a postal worker who was arrested recently in a controversial dispute that was on camera. What does that incident say about the training police have received recently about de-escalation and communication?
Okay, and relative to the first one, the comments by Assemblyman Barron, I thought my reaction to them, I was very disappointed that any elected official in this city or this state would get to the line where he was at great risk of crossing it, where he would be pretty close to inciting violence. So the cautionary warning I extended to him was that those who play with matches have got to be very careful before they start a fire. And that type of language is not appropriate at any time from any elected official. So again, we'll watch as we go forward, as these matters go forward, that and hope that he keeps his language in check. And that's my perspective as commissioner. Secondly, the issue you're referring to, the 7-1 precinct incident involving a conditions team, four plainclothes officers, including a lieutenant, in which an arrest was made of a postal worker on duty driving a postal vehicle. I've had the opportunity to review that case last week personally, reviewed the videos. You have access to a cell phone video, that we have other videos that give a much larger and clearer interpretation of what occurred there. I have several concerns, several very significant concerns that I've talked with Chief O'Neill about, and Chief Gomez, Chief of Patrol. One, our instructions are that the conditions officers do not work in plainclothes. All four of these people, including the lieutenant, were in street clothes, not in uniform. That's in direct violation of our patrol guide, so we will be investigating that element of it. I was not happy with some of the behavior I saw on that video or videos, and so pending the internal affairs investigation, which is going forward, including interrogations of all four officers, the lieutenant and three officers. Those officers have been taken out of any of those type of specialized assignments till they are questioned, until the internal affairs investigation goes forward. And as part of that investigation, they will also be speaking to, one, the complainant, the individual who was arrested, as well as the many witnesses that are evident on that video. We had a team there. This incident occurred a little over a week ago, so we had a team there a week after the event at the exact time to see if same people that were on the video might be at that location at that time. So there's a full internal affairs investigation. I'm fully involved with it. And on an initial review of the video, I am not pleased with what I saw, the actions of our officers. But internal affairs will make a more complete report to me once their interviews are completed, as their investigation goes forward.
There was a shooting, I think it was a Friday, of a young man who was grievously wounded in the head. He succumbed, I think, today. What's the status of that investigation? Have you determined what the motive of the shooting was, and you have the suspects?
Tony, I believe you're talking about the shooting in the 2-3 precinct outside the Jefferson houses. We have a young man, a 16-year-old male, Juwan Tavares, who's walking down 3rd Avenue with a bunch of other friends, about 9 other kids. Friday afternoon, just after 4:30, they saw some girls standing outside in front of the Jefferson houses and began to engage them. I actually knew the girls as well. So while they're standing there talking to the girls, all these fellows that came down are from the Wagner houses, which is directly up the street. There have been some problems before between Wagner and Jefferson, so we're looking at this right now as a possible gang issue. I'm not saying this young male was part of that. He was with a group. We have a singular shooter fires 4 times from inside Jefferson houses under a scaffolding. It's kind of tough to see with some white construction mesh covering him. So he is struck 1 time in the head. We do not believe he was specifically targeted rather than the whole group was. Right now, we're going forward. We sent the Crime Stoppers out all weekend long, trying to get some information, and the public is responding. We have some definitely very strong leads, and all of which are describing this possible gang issue with them. This young man passed away this past Sunday at Harlem Hospital, Sunday afternoon. That's where we are with the investigation right now.
One more, and please stop.
Yeah.
Go. So any more information to the homicide investigation and the increase in Mr. Cooley, who's found in his apartment?
Yeah. Mr. Cooley was found in the 19th precinct. He was there for several days without anybody knowing he passed. Right now, we're active in the investigation. It is not deemed a homicide yet by the OCME, but we are looking at it as it will be a homicide. We recovered some specific forensic information who gave us a lead into a person of interest that we're looking at right now. That's all I really want to say at this point. A lot of
Okay. Other topics?
There's an investigation going on now, the State Attorney General's Office, the nonprofit in Housing Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
There's been an investigation by the Mayor's Office of Contract Services. I think they might have had some contact up to that point. Do you know what the Mayor's investigation is?
There's been an investigation, I know, by the Attorney General's Office and Department of Investigation. From what I've heard so far, that firm has been addressed very vigorously. The CEO has been removed, and we are working now to take steps to get resources back from that company.
Mr. Mayor, the Working Families Party is calling for a debate in the Democratic primary in New York. Wondering if you think a debate here ahead of the April 19th primary would benefit New Yorkers and the public?
Leave it to the candidates to decide. I think in general, the debates have been engaging for the public, so I certainly am a fan of them, but it's up to the candidates to decide.
Mr. Mayor, North Carolina just enacted an anti-LGBT law that severely limits civil rights for all groups, actually.
Right.
Will you ban city travel there as you once did with Indiana and then repealed it after they repealed their law? And would you extend that to Georgia if the legislature overrides the veto of Governor Deal today of a similar bill? And just finally, is the city ensuring that its own religious contractors, including the new school safety officers, are not discriminating based on sexual orientation, gender identity, race, et cetera?
On the questions related to North Carolina and Georgia, yes, we've initiated a non-essential travel ban for North Carolina as of today. And in the event that the governor's veto in Georgia is overridden, we will do so for Georgia as well. I think it's quite clear that voices of conscience all over the country are expressing outrage at these decisions, which are reinstituting discrimination against the LGBT community. And it's also quite clear that a lot of the corporate sector is making clear that it will not participate in states that have such laws. So my hope is that both these states will relent, but we certainly are not going to have any non-essential travel to those states if these laws do continue in effect. In terms of any entities that we do business with, we're always looking to make sure that there are no instances of discrimination. We have a very vigorous Human Rights Commission, as you know, and so that's something we're constantly looking for any complaints or concerns about. Yeah, Jen.
Would you return the campaign donations to this, the former nonprofit
Right.
AIDS nursing facility? Can you just say generally, what are your thoughts on what happened?
Yeah, I'm very unhappy about this situation. It should not have happened. We're now reviewing all our practices to make sure that something like this does not happen again. From what we know so far, we were lied to. And the notion was that we were expecting a senior facility and instead got something very, very different. But that also means that we need to tighten up our rules and our approaches to inhibit any company who would do that kind of thing. So I'm not happy. I've called for a real thorough investigation and whatever changes in our approach we need to take. Say again?
Who lied to the city?
I'm not sure if that's the name of the company, but the company involved ultimately did private housing when they said they were going to do a nursing home. That's who I'm saying lied to us.
Mr. Mayor, when did you first learn of this, the problem that existed at this Rivington house? Was it with publication of the article
Right.
last week, or?
When it became public.
So your administration, though, learned of it earlier. Are you disturbed that the communication was not such that the Department of Citywide Administrative Services would have let you know that they had concerns enough that they would stop all sorts of deed restrictions?
Yeah, I don't think this was handled right. There's no two ways about it. It should not have happened to begin with. We unfortunately cannot be too trusting with any company that seeks to make a profit. And this just points out that the standards, some that we've inherited, but I'm sure things we've worked on since we've got here, are just not sufficient. And we should not be trusting in these situations. We need real guarantees that a company will not basically flip a property and use it for private gain when they've made a commitment to some public usage. So I'm not happy about it, that it happened. I'm not happy about the fact that I didn't hear about it in advance before it became public. And we are looking now to see what actions we can take to penalize this company. And again, any policy changes that would inhibit this in the future.
Mayor, it's not often that New York becomes a competitive primary in both parties. And I'm just wondering, as someone who's been involved in politics for a long time, what your thoughts on that? Obviously, you're supporting Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
But, you know, do you have any particular advice, thoughts about how to win votes here in New York City and in New York State?
I think, look, we become a very important state in this process, and you're right. There's been times when we haven't been in the primaries for sure, nor in the general election. So it's an important moment for New York. And my advice is to New York voters to get out and get involved, and particularly to reject the negative and divisive rhetoric of both Trump and Cruz. You know, New York can play a role in addressing the problem that we talked about earlier, that our national political discourse is sending a message of hate around this country and around the world, and has to be stopped. And New York would be a good place to begin the process of stopping it.
Kind of following up on that, Hillary Clinton's chief strategist, Joel Benenson, said today that Bernie Sanders would be campaigning like a Brooklynite, and that Hillary Clinton would be campaigning like a senator. And I'm wondering if you might take any umbrage at that comment as a proud Brooklyn.
I assume the phrase "campaigning like a Brooklynite" is a compliment. So I don't know where Joel Benenson's from, and I don't know what he meant, but I think Brooklyn, being one of the most admired places in the country right now, and the culture of Brooklyn being associated with, you know, spirit and spunk and energy and resolve, I think that's a compliment. Yeah.
So sorry to pick up on the Rivington house thing one more time. So you have a new leader at DCAS
Yes.
since January. This all happens under the new leadership there. Are you concerned that you didn't learn about this? And are you looking at any changes or any kind of...
The new commissioner at DCAS, Lizette Camillo, I think is exemplary. She did a wonderful job as director of the Mayor's Office of Contracts. And I think she's a perfect person to fix whatever's been broken at DCAS. Yeah,
Your fund
I'll
to
come on over.
advance-
Go ahead.
Thank you. Your fund to advance New York City in the Office of Veteran Affairs, they announced 2 public-private partnerships to help end veteran homelessness. I was wondering if you could give a statement regarding that.
We've been very committed to this goal. First, to end chronic veterans homelessness. This was the goal that President Obama set for cities all around the country. I think it was a really important act on his part. No president had ever done that before. We reached that goal last year. But there are still veterans who are homeless at times, not chronically all the time, but at any time it's not acceptable. So we continue to work to find more and more permanent homes for our veterans. And the Mayor's Fund is playing a crucial role, bringing in private donations that are going to help us to put together the permanent housing for our veterans. So I want to encourage all New Yorkers who care about our veterans, who feel as I do, that anyone who served us overseas should not come back home and end up homeless, donate to this effort at the Mayor's Fund so we can find homes for these veterans. And I would also like to note that employers should constantly look for every opportunity to hire veterans, because housing is one piece of the equation, but our veterans need good jobs as well. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, obviously it's crunch time in the state budget negotiations.
A, what's your latest sort of sense of how New York City interests are faring? And B, what are your top one or two concerns about what's going on?
Well, look, there have been voices speaking out since February saying that the city should not suffer cutbacks when it comes to CUNY and when it comes to Medicaid. We shouldn't have our affordable housing efforts undermined by needless bureaucracy. We should get more support in our efforts to end homelessness. These issues have been talked about now for months and months. This is supposed to be one of the decision days. What I can tell you for sure, I spoke to Speaker Hasty today and yesterday. He has, and the Assembly has consistently supported the interests of New York City and fought hard to make sure that there would be no cuts to our budget in terms of CUNY, in terms of Medicaid. There would be nothing that would stand in the way of our efforts to create affordable housing. The Assembly, in its one House bill, went out of its way to say the state had to do more to help us in dealing with homelessness. So the Assembly's been very consistent. I spoke to the governor this morning, and I still don't have real answers. There's no budget language. There's no confirmation or guarantees related to CUNY, related to Medicaid, or any of these other issues. And the things I talked about back in February when I gave my budget testimony in Albany, I talked about the fact that the state was going to take away some of our sales tax revenue in a way that we thought was arbitrary and unfair. Nothing's been resolved on that front. I want to see action, and I want to see real language that we can take to the bank. Right now, the same reality as the day after the governor's State of the State is true. I said, he said none of this would cost New York City a penny. I said I will hold him to it, take him at his word, but hold him to it. And I'm still going to hold him to it because as of this moment, we have no guarantees, and we need them. The people in New York City need those guarantees. I think it was inappropriate. And I think elected officials are supposed to encourage peace and dialogue and a way for people to work out problems and never suggest that violence is likely. No, I have not been. Yes. I want to see ethics reform in Albany. I've for a long time believed in things like public financing of elections. And obviously a lot more disclosure, and that's something that has to happen. Whether it happens now or it happens in the legislative session is less important to me than the fact that it needs to happen. Yes?
Last question.
Any idea who buried Donald Trump in Central Park?
No, nothing yet, nothing yet. We'll let you know, though. Thanks, everyone.
Any leads?